Good morning, everybody. I'm Tracy Stewart. I'm a program specialist for Girl Scouts Spirit of Nebraska Council. I want to welcome you to another segment of our Girl Scouts at Home online program. And I'm excited today. We're going to be talking about the importance of voting and being registered to vote. And I have a special guest with me this morning. Her name is Heather Doxson, and she is let me get it right, the training and oh my gosh, why am I struggling on that word? Implementations coordinator, okay, training and implementations coordinator for the Secretary of State in the Elections Division. Woo, how'd I do, Heather?
You got it, perfect, yes.
All right, awesome. So we're just going to kind of jump right on in. And Heather, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you're at today in terms of what you're doing with your career?
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on today. I really appreciate the chance to be able to share some of this information with everybody because
Absolutely.
It's very important. So I've been with the Secretary of State for about 2.5 years, almost 3. But I've been in elections since 2008. I started with a company out of Omaha that actually manufactures equipment and software that help counties and states run elections. And for them, I was a trainer. So I was able to travel to many different places. We call them jurisdictions. So a county is a jurisdiction, a state is a jurisdiction, etc. And I was able to be exposed to many different ways that states and counties actually help people vote. When I left there, I came to the Secretary of State's office, and so now I do it more in a centralized way. I work just with Nebraska, so It's really fun to be helping my home state. I work with all 93 counties, teaching them the software. Oh, sorry. The software and how to use the equipment that counts the ballots, as well as making sure that they understand all of the Nebraska state specific laws in regards to elections and voting. The biggest thing though is that we help make sure people that want to vote are able to vote. As long as they are US citizens and meet a couple of other criteria, we want to make sure that they're registered and that they have their registrations updated so that they can vote.
Nice. So you mentioned a couple other criteria. You want to tell us what those are real quick?
Sure. So it's going to depend. If you're a first-time person registering, so like when you turn 18 and you go to register to vote, Nebraska does not require voter ID per se, which means you don't have to show your driver's license to vote, okay?
Right.
What we do require is when you first sign up to vote or register to vote, we need some kind of photo ID. It can be your student ID, it could be a work ID with your picture and your name on it. It doesn't have to be government issued.
Okay.
And that's just so they know that person is you when you're registering. We also need something that shows your address that you're registering to vote at. So that could be a utility bill, that could be something you get from the DMV, like your driver's license. That's why a lot of people connect voter registration with the DMV, and we actually have a program, because when you get your driver's license, there's a check mark on the form that says, do you want to register to vote at the same time? And we have a computer program in the background that nobody sees that actually sends that data to our office and our counties so that they can get somebody registered at the same time.
Okay.
The other criteria that we need, there is an oath on the form that a person has to attest that they're a US citizen, that they're not a felon, a couple other things, and then we do need a signature.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So relatively easy.
Yes. And, you know, we have our state forms that a person can fill out to register, but there are also, you'll see in high schools a lot of times, especially government teachers will do voter registration drives, and
Mm,
they may have a different form, but as long as it captures the main information that we need to register a person, it's fine.
very cool. So what
Yeah.
can you tell us about like the voter registration in Nebraska in terms of like statistics? Do you have any information like that in terms of like who's registered to vote or what kind of,
Sure.
yeah, populations there are?
Yeah, I can actually give you that information, or I can show you the website, whichever you would prefer.
Whatever works.
Um, so I guess one thing I will take you to is the Secretary of State website, because it's got a lot of great information. So let me get it pulled up here for you. My internet's a little slow this morning. So I'm going to share this now. That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So the website is sos.nebraska, all spelled out, .gov. And
Okay.
this is the home page. There is a section, a tab right here for elections. So there's lots of different information. Everything in this menu right here is what's handled by our office. So for example, if you wanted to run for office, there's a section for candidates and forms and things like that. But let's talk about voters, since that's what you were asking. So general voter information. There's a section for registering to vote, you know, frequent questions, things like that, forms that you might need. So for one thing, there's a couple of different ways to vote, or to register, excuse me. You can register online. Now, the caveat to that is you have to have a valid Nebraska state ID or driver's license,
Okay.
because this online system is actually tied in with the DMV, and so it uses that number on that piece of identification to pull up your information. However, there is also an online voter registration application. We have PDFs that somebody can fill in and print off. They can either mail that into their respective county office or bring it in person.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we also have it in Spanish, because we do have 3 counties in Nebraska, because of their population, that have to have Spanish equivalents for everything.
Okay.
So, and after, you know, this year is a big year because we're doing a census this year
Mm-hmm.
in the nation. And I have a feeling that we may see some changes in that. Maybe a couple more counties will add to that after the census results come through.
Okay.
So, but for some statistics, if we look up here, so we just had our primary in May, the primary election.
Yep.
So we'll be leading up to our general election in November. And in this manual, or this Canvas book, it'll tell you some of the statistics. So here are our statewide totals. We have 1.2 million registered voters in the state. And then,
So Heather, can I ask, like, okay, if that's the number that we have registered to vote, do you have, is there a, what's the number on like who's eligible to vote? Like who's eligible
that is
versus,
the number.
oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So when we say registered voters, that includes anybody that's registered and considered able to vote. Okay.
Okay.
Our population is going to be higher than that, obviously, because people that are under 18, et cetera, they're not registered yet.
Right.
So, and then in Nebraska, we recognize 3 parties for voting. We have Republican, Democrat, and Libertarian.
Okay.
Now, if a person chooses to not register as a party, in a party, they are what we consider a nonpartisan. Some states call that independent, but in Nebraska, we call it nonpartisan. We don't recognize an independent party. A few years ago, we used to have the Green Party, but their participation and their registrations fell below a certain threshold. And so that party is no longer in Nebraska.
Okay.
If a party wants to be established as a recognized party in Nebraska, they have to go through a petition process so that they can be recognized as a party. And so that would mean they would have to go around the state and get a certain number of signatures from people in order to be considered a party.
Gotcha. On this website, Heather, is there, I know there, for the candidates, there's information for if somebody wants to run for office. Is there something for voters to look at that would give them information about the candidates if they wanted to research candidates?
We do not do that at our office because we try to maintain at our office kind of a neutral position. We're about administering, not, talking about here's the Republican candidates, here's the Democrats, etc.
Okay. Sure.
Usually you would see that like in the newspaper or something a lot of times, but not through our office.
Okay. Cool.
This also shows you the petitions that we have circulating in the state right now.
Yeah, I was just looking down there.
Yeah, so there's some interesting ones, and we do plan, we are expecting probably 4 or 5 of those to be turned in with enough signatures to be on the ballot. So that'll be an interesting thing for people to look at come November to see which ones of these issues actually made it onto the ballot. How
many signatures do you have to have for a petition to be put on the ballot?
Depending on the type of petition that it is, whether it's so you see we have a constitutional amendment here, but then we also have what we call initiatives. So obviously a constitutional amendment petition is actually changing what the Nebraska state constitution says. That one requires a little bit more, signatures. And I believe, let me pull that up here. It takes 7% of the registered voters for an initiative. And then on top of that, there also has to be 5% of signatures of the population of 2/5 of the counties in Nebraska, which is 38 basically. I know this is where all that language gets a little crazy. For a constitutional amendment, there has to be 10% of signatures, and then also the states. So, in Lincoln, if you're in Lincoln, a lot of times if you go down to the Haymarket, you're going to see petition circulators, the people that come up to you and say, are you registered in Nebraska? Would you like to sign this petition?
Right. Yeah. There's been petitioners at like the Black Lives Matter marches and stuff. Yeah. So I've seen that here recently. Yeah. I think about the cannabis one, there was one on.
Yeah.
And I recognize that one.
They also will stand outside the DMV as people are coming in to get their driver's licenses renewed and whatever.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you have information? So, we're obviously Girl Scout organization. So, we, especially for our girls who are, in high school and, approaching that voter age, do you have information on like voter stats for young people or women, anything like that?
We don't have that for the primary right now. That's something we're still working on because we just finished canvassing. So now we're doing all these statistical reports for those type of demographics.
Okay.
So unfortunately, I don't have them with me today. I can get them to you when we have them.
Okay.
The thing about it's easier to get the age groups because when we do the voter registration, and I'll actually kind of show you what a screen looks like for voter registration, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm sharing with you now is actually what the voter registration system looks like in Nebraska. So when somebody gets a voter registration, they come into this software and they actually add the voter. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull up my record so you can see kind of what it looks like. So this is where they will come in and they'll put in all this information, and based on the address, so you guys know where I live and all my information now.
Oh, share it.
This determines what people get to vote on because of what section they live in a town or a county. Everything's sectioned off into precincts, and then it goes down into actual different precinct parts. And you'll see down here, this is where it tells us specific areas or jurisdictions or political subdivisions, we call them, what people get to vote on. So their school districts would be listed here, what they're going to vote on for school district, their polling location, whether right in here it shows you that they're an active voter and how they voted or how they registered. Oops, sorry about that. So this is what keeps everything, this is what we need to keep up to date. And this is why anytime somebody moves, whether it's in the same county or within Nebraska or even out of Nebraska, they need to let their voter registration system know. So either your county clerk, if you're in a smaller county, or in the larger counties in Nebraska, we have 5 large counties. They actually have specific election commissioners. But circling around, the reason I brought you into here is even though we have a gender field in this system, we in Nebraska don't track gender. Now you're going to have civic organizations like Appleseed and Civics Nebraska who track that type of information. We obviously, you have to have a birth date on your voter registration in order to register. So it's easier for us to break down age groups of voting than it is to do gender. So
Gotcha.
We probably, we work with other organizations because they can get from us what they call a voter list. And that's the type of thing that they would be using it for, is to get that information.
Nice.
We work with the League of Women Voters. All the political parties request this information. Those other civic organizations that I mentioned. So that's how they're getting their statistics, is getting, in part, by getting a voter list from our office.
Gotcha. So they can strategize.
Exactly. And candidates, before an election, when they're ready to start campaigning, they'll get that voter list from our office so that they can maybe do a mailing campaign or something like that.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Lots of different parts.
Yeah, that's more than I had thought of. So it's interesting though. We're in a presidential election year, and obviously lots of things going on. If you had a message that you could share with our girls, what would you tell them about the importance of voting and registering to vote, and how does that play in, because Girl Scouts, our mission is building girls of courage, confidence, character who make the world a better place. And that making the world a better place, we have you know, girls who are taking action to create change and make a difference in their communities, whether it's locally, globally. So that advocacy piece is an important value within Girl Scouts. What would you say to the girls in terms of why this is so important?
Well, why it's so important is that if you're not registered and you don't vote, your voice is not heard. That's the nut in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, there's many other things you can do. Some of those organizations that I mentioned, they love volunteers. If you wanted to incorporate a voter registration drive with them, that would be something to help get people registered. Something else, we talk about mass incarceration and things like that with felons. It used to be in Nebraska that if you got a felony, once you were a felon, you could no longer vote.
Mm-hmm.
However, a few years ago in Nebraska, that law was changed. And once a felon has satisfactorily completed their sentence or their probation, whichever it may be,
Right.
2 years from the date of satisfaction, they're eligible to register to vote in Nebraska again. I think that's a group that a lot of times doesn't realize they have that option.
Yeah.
So, getting that message out is important. But especially for young girls and for women, there are so many issues out there that affect us, and more every day,
Yeah.
that getting involved and knowing what the issues are, becoming educated on those issues, and making sure that you are registered to vote and that your registration is up to date and active so that you don't get cheated out of the chance to place your vote on that ballot.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing the timelines of deadlines for when ballots are due, that's extremely important. Because, in Nebraska, it was a big deal this year, especially because we ran a primary during a pandemic.
Yeah.
And we were implementing new equipment at the same time. So it was a little crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But, Nebraska has always had the option to vote early by mail. I think a lot of people didn't realize that. So, if you think that you're not going to be able to vote on the actual election day, contact your county and request an early ballot.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it by email. You can do it. They just need something that has your signature on it. So it can be an email that you send to them. You don't even have to fill out a special form. You could just write a message on a piece of paper. I would like an early ballot sent to this address, and your signature, and that's all they need.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it's, knowing what the laws are for elections. Any questions that you ever have, our office is extremely glad to answer any of those or lead you in the right direction. So, knowing who those resources are when you have questions or if you're not sure what your options are, that's always important too.
Yeah.
But absolutely registering is the biggest thing, because without that, you can't vote.
Right. Yeah, true. When you talked about your voice not being heard, it just reminded me, we had a conversation. I had a public policy program here recently for some high school girls. And we had the opportunity of having Senator Anna Wishart on with us. And
Yep,
one of the things she talked about was she gave an example of, and I can't remember who it was specifically, but she gave the example that one of her colleagues was, there was a 6-vote difference between, that person being elected or not. So, when you think about, is my voice really being heard? Does my voice really count?
absolutely.
Especially locally. And that was kind of her
I was
point
going to say
too,
that.
is that local elections are really important because, that 6 votes, you know, you think about, wow, that's not very many at all. So yes, your vote does count, you know, so that was a cool point for her to talk about too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate
It's
that.
it's an irony because the local contest is where your votes make the hugest difference, and they're typically the least researched and least voted on contests.
Mm,
So
yeah,
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 so
that's
that's another
interesting.
thing I would say is, you know, all the counties are required to post sample ballots either on their website or at their offices. So if you don't know who's going to be on your ballot, even if you're not old enough to vote yet, go get a sample ballot from them and just research those people and see what their platforms are. I mean, that's a great way to do, to
Right.
start being engaged.
Yeah, so the sample ballots would be, those are it's basically an example of the ballot that would be coming when it
Yeah.
is time to vote. Okay,
And it'll show all of the contests for all of the precincts and areas in their county.
interesting. I like it. I mean, I'm learning new things, Heather. This is cool.
That's
And
good.
I appreciate what, okay, so let's wrap this up a bit. What would be, I guess, the biggest aha moment that you have had since working in elections? What's been the biggest thing that you've learned in terms of elections?
Well, the first, I mean, just from day one, was just how much there is involved in elections. The assumption for many people, or the joke, is, well, what do you do the other 3 years? You know,
Right, yeah.
and there are constantly elections going on, small local elections, to raise taxes for like swimming pools and things like that, bond
Mhm.
elections, school district elections. So that was probably my biggest aha, was how many little elections take place and how much stuff goes on behind the scenes.
Mm.
And this was kind of a sad aha moment, and it wasn't really an aha, but it just confirmed how much people really don't know about their own rights,
Mm.
and empowering them to find out that information and everything. So that's why I really appreciate this opportunity, because giving you the information is power.
Absolutely.
So you
Yeah,
know
that's very cool. Well, yeah, I don't want to well, I want to be respectful of your time. Boy, it must be Monday because I am way more tongue tied than I normally am.
it's
It's
all good.
Monday, whatever. Um, we're just winging it and doing the best that we can. But no, Heather, I really appreciate you, taking the time to talk with us this morning, providing a little bit of education regarding, what you do. And here's something too. I mean, we talk about entrepreneurship, but when we're talking about like careers, I never would have thought that there would be a career related around like elections and, voter registration. And you mentioned software, girls are interested in coding, and there's just like
Yep,
so many things, that
absolutely.
could really take their interests and their talents and learn. And it's just cool. I just really appreciate it. Oh, and there's one of my naughty cats in the background.
Well, and thank you. I mean, I tell you, I'm not the most political person, but I love helping the counties administer elections
Yeah.
and working with them. And if it wasn't for my people in the counties, I mean, I wouldn't be here. And because I want to help them help you, you know what I'm saying?
Right, right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well,
And
again,
if,
thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure I'll probably be in touch with more
please,
questions and
yes,
opportunities, for you to do some educating of our girls.
yep,
And, girls, if you're close to 18, make sure that you're registering to vote. Encourage your friends and family to get registered to vote. If you want to get involved in something, you can reach out. Heather, why don't you give them your contact information or like if they wanted to, like where they could go maybe to find more information, or if they wanted to get involved in
Sure.
helping out.
So the first thing I would circle back to the website, sos.nebraska, all spelled out, .gov. You're always welcome to reach out to me. My work number is 402-471-6148. And my email is Heather, HEATHER, .doxon, D as in David, OXON, @nebraska.gov.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks again, Heather. Have a good rest of your Monday. And yeah, just appreciate you.
Thank you, and go girls.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Have a good day.